Okay, well, good to kick off. Thanks.
Okay, so welcome everybody to this month's BioWednesday, and accustomed as we are now to being online for BioWednesdays. But actually being online gives us opportunities, and I'm delighted with the mix of panelists we have this evening to give quite a unique insight into what the UK life sciences sector maybe looks like and its opportunities when viewed through a US lens, a Zoom lens maybe. And we can look forward to that discussion. This is obviously with Fish Richardson as one of the corporate sponsors of One Nucleus. And one of the great things about having them as a corporate sponsor is that we can get directly into the sort of true insight of what they see on the US side when they're working with their clients and partners. And how does that play out for the panelists in various roles, which we'll hear about shortly. So just in terms of housekeeping, if everyone who isn't on the panel and not speaking, if you could stay muted and keep the cameras off, as my colleague who's doing logistics behind the scene at the moment said, that just keeps the screen looking nice and tidy. So if you could do that, that would be great. Chat box will be open to use for everyone. I fully encourage people to place questions or comments within that. I know Mike will talk through at the start in a moment how we will manage that and work in any questions. So from me, it's just welcome, and thanks to the panelists for agreeing to share their insights. I'll thank you in advance. And I'll hand over to Mike Ward, of Global Thought Leader from Clarivate. Mike, over to you.
So thanks very much, Tony. So hello and welcome to this BioWednesday webinar, which is going to be focusing on opportunities for UK life sciences, but from a US perspective. As Tony said, my name is Mike Ward. I'm the Global Head of Thought Leadership for Healthcare and Life Sciences at Clarivate. And it's my pleasure to be actually hosting this discussion. And as you're going to see, Tony has actually assembled a really interesting group of commentators to discuss the topic. So before I launch into the webinar, I'd just like to remind everyone that you have the opportunity to pose questions to the panelists. So all you need to do is just put your question in the chat box, and if your question is specific to one of the panelists, please indicate who you'd like that question to be posed to. Otherwise, what I'll do is I'll just post it to the whole panel. You may remain anonymous, or if you want everyone to know who asked the question, particularly to show how smart you are, then just provide your name and an affiliation, and I'll mention that. So when we look at how well the UK has done on a global scale, the UK has been clearly the standout leader in European terms since probably biotech started, and particularly where it comes to fundraising. So, for example, since just the start of 2018, UK biotech sector has raised more than £7.2 billion, which is about $9 billion plus, and has been over a number of years always in sort of the top 5 regions for biotech startup fundraising, behind Massachusetts, San Francisco Bay Area, San Diego, and more recently China. So it's always been there or thereabouts. And in fact, if we look 30 years ago, and I've been around long enough to actually recall that, the US Office of Technology Assessment published a report called Biotechnology in a Global Economy, which examined the impact of biotech in several industries and looked at the efforts of 16 nations across the globe to, and what they were doing to develop commercial uses of biotech, and also looking at sort of the actions that they were using to both directly and indirectly to actually influence innovation in biotech. So at that point, in 1991, in its assessment, the OTA, basically, this is what they had to say about the UK. Its strengths, high quality of science, public acceptance of biotechnology, and weaknesses, decreasing government funding, a lack of venture capital for startups, and a lack of coordination between government ministries. So to kick off the webinar, I'm going to ask each of the participants to introduce themselves and their companies, and then reflect briefly on what some of the bullet points would be if the OTA were to assess the current status of UK biotech strengths and weaknesses, in that global perspective. And what we'll do is we'll initially go alphabetically, so starting with Chris, followed by Jason, Chad, and then Kathy. So Chris.
Thank you, Mike, and thank you for the opportunity to be here. So hi, everyone. I'm Chris Lorriman. I'm a senior manager for innovation and commercialization at the University of California, San Diego. I've previously worked at UCL Business PLC in London and former employee of Parexel and Smith & Nephew, and I grew up in the Midlands. And in terms of the question about the strengths and weaknesses, I think it's worth noting that that OTA assessment was from 30 years ago. And that was only 10 years after the Bayh-Dole law was passed, which has more recently been pointed to as one of the most influential laws ever passed in the United States. But in the 90s, its impact wasn't yet fully understood. And I think we'll talk more about that as the discussion goes on. In terms of the UK strengths, absolutely the fantastic science. You can't do this stuff without the raw feedstock. And the reputation for the UK right now is so strong with AstraZeneca and Oxford. Everyone on planet Earth is talking about those things. So that's fantastic. There is a true, real drive for business and interest in entrepreneurship and forming new companies. There's fantastic resources. And the UK spends so much money on innovation and entrepreneurship. And I will say that, post-pandemic is going to reshape how we do business. That's another opportunity and a strength for the UK. I think in terms of downsides, the amount of money is almost a downside because it's being put in the wrong places, honestly. And most importantly, there is no framework. The UK has no Bayh-Dole law. You try to replicate what the US does without having the framework to do it. And that is the absolute #1 issue, and because it underpins everything. And finally, I would say there's got to be a willingness to change and develop. And I'm concerned that sometimes people are like, no, we're fantastic. I know that because I did it when I was at UCL Business. We thought we were amazing, but there really are opportunities to grow and develop.
Thanks, Chris. Jason.
Thanks, Mike. Thanks, everyone. So I'm Jason Mellett. I am the CEO and co-founder of Start Codon. We're a new venture builder and accelerator fund based in Cambridge in the UK, despite my accent. And what we are seeking to do is find really exciting early stage companies, therapeutics, diagnostics, medtech, digital health, broadly speaking, to help them grow and leverage the resources of the Cambridge ecosystem, which still, despite some of the challenges we might have in the UK, is ranked consistently in the top 5, if not top 3 innovation ecosystems in the world. We're backed heavily by pharma, who have an interest in expanding their operations in the UK, so Roche, Genentech, and Novartis. And we're clearly on the, I think, cold face when it comes to really driving innovation and increasing the number of companies that ultimately, hopefully, will grow and scale in the UK. I originally came to move here to complete my PhD back in 2004. So it's been about 17 years I've been in the UK, and I decided to stay, which is, I think, an important point to make, because many of my peers at the time said, why would you leave the States? If you want to forge a career in science, why on earth would you go overseas to the UK? Now, keep in mind, I never had a passport and I never left Louisiana before then, but that's besides the point. I knew that I wanted to go to an environment that had outstanding science, but also had all the potential. I feel that oftentimes there are ecosystems that are overly saturated already, where a lot of the competition and the, let's say, excessive amounts of capital that are available maybe drive down that hunger that we still have here in the UK. You don't have to be as lean when you can easily raise 50 million on a Series A or even a seed round, just off of the back of having an interesting idea that you wrote on a napkin and you pitched to somebody at a Starbucks. Now, I'm being a bit facetious, but I do know that we have really scrappy early stage opportunities here in the UK. I think that going forward, we need to make sure that those startups that are forged here can actually grow and scale. if there are exits, that the exits are healthy, and we ensure that there's an upside for the UK ecosystem. And fundamentally, the Cambridge realm in which I exist, and the UK as a whole, but I'm going to speak to Cambridge now specifically, was built off of the back of three really core innovative areas: genomics, biologics, and AI. So if we can replicate that and really harness what is at the core of what makes technology and discovery so important in the UK, but find a way to channel that into companies that can grow and scale, that's going to be the win. It won't come easily. We have to make sure that we have healthy access to diverse and really, let's say, international leaders to make this a reality. And I'm looking forward to the conversation today to figure out how we can really bridge between the US, but not necessarily always replicate what's been done in other ecosystems. We've got to find a British flavor and figure out what works here.
Yeah. Chad.
Well, good morning. Maybe it's just good morning for Chris and I. Good evening, I guess, for everyone else. My name is Chad Shear. I'm a partner and the chair of the life sciences practice at Fish Richardson. We are the last of the large intellectual property boutiques. We do nothing but patent, trademark, copyright, and at least for the last 20 years, my practice has been largely, if not entirely, focused on litigation, on representing large drug companies, branded drug companies in litigation across the country, and frankly across the world. I've had trials everywhere. In the last 3 to 4 years, my practice has really morphed as more and more clients have come to me to help them navigate diligence around a deal, whether that's an asset acquisition, whether that's an in-license, whether that's a whole, purchase of another company. And part of that is because of that 20 years of litigation experience allows me to assess risk in a way that someone who doesn't have that experience might not be able to. But so I've spent the last 20, 21 years in the life sciences space, largely on the legal side. To your question, Mike, which is a really good one, if we were to reassess, issue that report again today, 30 years later, what would the comments be? And I think Chris really hit the nail on the head, which is the Bayh-Dole Act has had a tremendous impact on the US ecosystem, life sciences ecosystem. 30 years ago, you wouldn't have people who have jobs like Chris. You wouldn't have universities that had tech transfer offices. The few universities that did had no idea what to do with them. And now instead, what we see is not only every university has one, I mean, truly every university has one, but they're actually out there developing business. It is far more than just let's sit back and see what we can do. The universities have taken it one step further, and they're actually seeking out commercial partners because they realize the tremendous amount of revenue that it can bring in. So if we were to assess that same report today, I think that the biggest difference would be not only the lack of the framework that Chris mentioned, but I guess what I would say is a difference in where money comes from. While the US government still funds a tremendous amount of research, there is so much money available, and that money has really shifted its focus. It used to be that large pharmaceutical companies, large entities, they wanted to buy late phase 2, early phase 3 assets. That just isn't true anymore. They're now much more willing to invest in assets that are not only preclinical, but maybe even haven't gone into an animal yet, and you're just basing the asset on an in vitro assay. So the amount of money that's out there has really shifted the focus of where people will look. So let me close it out and just say thank you all for including me. I'm really looking forward to today's discussion.
Right, and Kathy.
Hello, everyone. Thank you, BioWednesday, for this opportunity to get involved in this discussion. I'm Senior Director of Alliances for Takeda, and I actually work in the Centre for External Innovation, which includes Takeda Ventures as well. So my mission in life is exactly what Chad was just talking about, finding them pearls that are really early, driving partnerships to move them forward. And the partnerships can end up in a license, or they can end up in a startup company. And for me, the potential of getting great science out of academia and developing it with an industry viewpoint as to the sort of things that we need to deal with, reproducibility, actually finding a market and things like that, is really my mission in life. And I strongly believe that partnerships are something that tend to get forgotten in this discussion. Starting up companies is one route, and I think a lot of companies are now involved in helping people to start up companies, and that's certainly the case for Takeda. So I've been in the Bay Area actually for 8 years, and I've been pretty active across the academic industry space. I intentionally move between academia and industry on a regular basis. So I'm at the moment based at Stanford, and I have academic positions at UCSF as well, but I'm driving the alliances for Takeda. In terms of strengths, no one's going to argue about the reputation that the UK has for the science. Everyone knows that there is a mine of unmined great opportunities in the UK. The challenge is how we get to them and how we develop them. And I think in terms of the weaknesses, I completely agree with my fellow panelists about the Bayh-Dole Act. I think there's some work to be done there. But I also strongly believe the academic culture really needs to grow and extend. We need to help early entrepreneurs grow from a really, early academic base, and to see this as another way to fund the research that they want to do and want to get to patients. At the moment, I think there is still a preference for grants, which are hard to get and increasingly hard to get, and with the Brexit, possibly even harder to get. So we need to think about other opportunities. We need to grow the support that the government gives, both in terms of things like Bayh-Dole, but also in terms of tax incentives and incentives for increasing your patent filing in the UK. But growing the culture and the skill sets to translate that forward is I think the weaknesses, but actually you're making progress, and the triangle in particular is making progress. I will leave it there for the moment.
Great, thanks very much. So as you can see that Tony's pulled together a fantastic panel with lots of different experiences dotted around the world, and it's kind of cool that in fact two of those based actually in the States have got British accents, and then we have Jason here who's got an American accent, so sort of, an eclectic mix, nice diversity. Just want to remind everyone there is an opportunity to ask questions. I think just by some of the things we've already heard, I think that there's probably some areas that people want to explore further. So just to sort of come on that on the grounds of establishing the environment, or how governments can actually create an environment to sort of help the development of biotech. I mean, that was clearly one of the sort of key drivers that in that original OTA assessment. And only last week we had Matt Hancock, speaking of the Association of British Pharmaceutical Industries, saying that he wants the UK to be a superpower, right, in the life sciences. So thinking about that and thinking about things like Brexit, etc., I just wonder, when we look at the sort of the political climate, in the UK or Europe, or in the US. You know, when we look at that, where do we think innovators should actually look to incubate their inventions? You know, whether they're American inventors or European inventors. What do we think the best place or the best places are to actually get those things kicked off? Chris, I'm gonna pick you up first.
Thanks, Mike. Yeah, I mean, there's some big questions here. You know, you look at the big picture, you talk about the challenges for the UK with Brexit. Well, the US has got some very serious challenges right now: political, social, democratic. And, you know, my job is to help people form new companies. And that's a 20, 30-year undertaking from a life science patent perspective. You know, do they want to be doing it in the US? There's risks there. Where would you choose outside the US? You know, the UK has got to be a premium destination, Australia as well, I think. And it's worth noting the United States, to some degree, in terms of the tech scene, has lived on imported brains over the last 30 plus years. And if a little bit of that flow is reduced, where do they go? The UK is absolutely an option. And I think post-Brexit and post-pandemic are some real opportunities for the UK. And there's so much good stuff there in terms of the talent. You've got space, you've got support, you've got a very good legal system, including a Supreme Court who actually understands intellectual property, unlike the one in the United States. So I think there's a lot to be working with there.
Anybody else like to want to have a shot? Jason?
Yes, and thanks, Mike. No, I agree with everything that Chris said. I mean, obviously I would, because I'm here, so I'm totally biased. But I would say that as we set up companies, I think there are a couple of trends that are really exciting to see. So number one, despite Brexit, which I wholeheartedly think was not the right move, but fair play. The important thing is that I've increasingly seen US and European and Asian investors looking to invest in UK companies that will grow and scale here. So it used to be, say 10 years ago, people would assume that if you started off in the UK, the only way you could get access to US capital is you would have to move your company physically to either somewhere on the West Coast or the East Coast, because otherwise you're not going to be in the environment where they feel comfortable to give you their money, because they invest in companies in their neighborhood. They want to be able to drive to your board meeting. They don't want to fly overseas to your board meeting. So therefore, you need to flip your company from UK Limited to Delaware. You need to move to the States, and that's just the way it is. Increasingly, I'm seeing investors desperate to back UK companies. They feel that they get better deals here. They feel that it's easier to hire staff. And if you get access to that growth capital, plus the technical base, all you really are lacking, and this is something we still are struggling with in the UK, are the serially successful entrepreneurs and experienced leaders to lead these companies and take advantage of that opportunity. Because we've always had the tech. Increasingly, we have the investment and risk embracing investment as opposed to the risk aversion we sometimes have. But we need the leaders who can take these companies forward. But other than that, we've got the right environment and the right, I say, backing from the government with the Department of International Trade and their Global Entrepreneurs Program, saying that despite Brexit and the challenges of getting access to that human capital, the government is actively trying to court businesses and entrepreneurs to move to the UK to take advantage of all of that we have here. So it's a different world that we live in. You don't have to move to California or move to Boston in order to get access in the way that you maybe had to 10 years ago.
Kathy?
Yeah, I mean, I was going to say much the same as Jason, really. I mean, the truth is that the easy answer to that question for the last 30 years has been, actually probably less than that, thinking about it, has been the two centers of the Bay, San Diego as one, and Boston. But actually, I think that's changing. I think clusters will still be important going forward. But the UK has started to create its own clusters, and the Triangle is the greatest example of that. And I think, you know, the new world post-pandemic really does allow us to build these things virtually, to access the capital in other countries. And I think, you know, the US and China are clearly the leaders here. But, you know, we really need to to see it that way. And I would not advise people to start a company here because it's incredibly competitive. I mean, not that it's not in the UK, but why not start in the UK? Why not build there and build the background to go with it? So the support, you know, levels of support for true entrepreneurship to grow things, to help academics think this direction and think of this as an opportunity. Yes. So,
I mean, specifically, Kathy, if you sort of, you know, in your role, right, in Takeda, I mean, you're based in the Bay Area. What dealings have you actually had with the sort of the UK life sciences community, and you know, what would make it easier for you to actually, you know, work with them?
Yeah, it's an interesting question. I mean, I have to say, and Chris will probably say this as well, there's an awful lot of English people in the West Coast and around here who can support this and help. But in terms of reach out from the UK, I'm probably not in the best position to see that, but I can tell you that in terms of the company believes that there is a huge opportunity in the UK, and you know, is starting to work out how to address that. And I actually hear this from so many of my fellow companies in the pharma level, looking for early innovation, and the investors as well, looking for early innovation in the UK. So everyone knows it's there. The question is, how do we access it best? And I think you will see all of these companies and institutions actually starting to more actively try and access the UK space.
And that sort of that trade flow, is it you know, US entities sort of looking elsewhere with open arms, or does it actually require a sort of proactive push by, for example, you know, people, you know, in the one nucleus environment? Yeah.
This is an ecosystem issue. So I think, you know, it has to be all of them things is the answer. And I don't think there's one way of doing this, but we need to increase the flow of information reaching out either direction, really. I'd love to hear about early companies that are in the Takeda space, or early ideas in the Takeda space. That I could, you know, examine and see whether we could get a partnership, which I strongly believe is a really good way of developing things forward and translating things and move them forward. And I think there's huge opportunity, but it has to be all of these things. I don't think one of them works.
I'm going to pick up. Sorry, Chris.
I just wanted to step in and follow on from Catherine. You know, I spent 5 years doing this kind of role in the UK, in London, and I've had a similar amount of time here at UCSD, and I've done business with both academic institutions and businesses in the UK, and they make it phenomenally hard. There is overpricing, overvaluing of technologies, and there is no consistency to the instruments where deals get done. And I know, you know, when you're on the other side, when you're in the UK, you're like, no, they're trying to rip me off. I'm not trying to rip anyone off. I've done the job. I know it's got to be reformed, because, and people don't know because nobody's told them. You know, the UK looked at the US and said, wow, that tech transfer, that early technology industry thing looks great. Let's replicate it. Well, you replicated what it looks like, not what it is. And it's got to come down to the basic plumbing. And you guys spend months and months on deals. I spend days on them. And there's just a fundamental difference in the speed of money when it comes down to that.
That's an interesting point.
If I might jump in, Mike, Chris makes an interesting point, because it's not just about, well, I'll get to the early investment in a second. The UK isn't competing with the Cambridges, Bay Area, San Diego. That's not who your competition is. Your competition is Philadelphia, it's St. Louis, it's Dallas. Every city in America, every state in America, their state governments have huge task force dedicated to attracting biotech, because every state views it the same way. It's high paying, clean jobs, environmentally friendly jobs will drastically increase the tax base that the state can then draw from. So it isn't just that you're competing against sort of these three giant ecosystems, or two, as Kathy sort of rightly put San Francisco and San Diego in as one. So it's not only that. So you have to be able to move quickly, like Chris was talking, but it's not just about getting the early investment, it's about keeping the early investment. The reason to me that Boston, San Diego, San Francisco all do so well is they have three key things. They have world-class research institutions like UCSD, like Scripps here in San Diego. They have world-class research hospitals at every single one of those locations, whether it's Scripps here in San Diego, whether it's Brigham and Young or Mass General in Boston, whether it's UCSF or USF in San Francisco. And on top of that, they have density. It used to be that GSK only wanted to operate in Pennsylvania, that DuPont, AZ only wanted to operate in Delaware. Now you can drive down over the neighborhood that Chris works in, you can drive down the street and you'll see little satellite offices of every single pharmaceutical company from all over the world. And why is that important? It's not important because they're there. It's important because when you're recruiting talent, they know the people that like to go work at startups, they tend to be the same type of personality, and they tend to go from startup to startup to startup to startup. And they want to go to an area where they know after 3 years, whether the company is acquired or whether it doesn't work, that they can just walk down the street and get their next job, as opposed to sort of uprooting their family. So Jason mentioned earlier several times this idea of ecosystem. And the ecosystem really is critical for a whole lot of reasons. But in the end of the day, it doesn't matter how good your fundamental research is if you don't have the people there to take advantage of it. And so you have to figure out ways to recruit the people. The good news for the UK is, and I'll just finish out with this thought, the good news for the UK is the United Kingdom for Americans, and Jason can comment on this, has a certain romance about it. That other areas don't. And so there are a lot of people that would be certainly interested in moving to the United Kingdom, in bringing their families there. The tax situation has gotten so bad here in the US on individuals that the tax is no longer a barrier. Personal taxes are no longer a barrier. So there's a wealth of talent that's, ripe for the taking, so to speak.
So I mean that's an interesting point, because it also relates to something that sort of Jason was talking about in terms of talent here, and I was just, there is an argument that the number of super experienced executives right here in the UK is suboptimal. And in fact, I mean, you can see it, the boards of many companies are actually populated by essentially the same people. It's almost as if they just kind of shuffle up the deck and sort of pick out the names. So I was just wondering, what should backers of UK biotechs be doing to, hire or develop talent that is going to be world class, that is going to, definitely attract the attention of, for example, sort of US partners? Who'd like to have a shot at that? Well, Chris, and then Jason, and then I think everybody wants to have a go. So Chris first.
So it's really interesting you mention having the same people on boards as being a challenge. Well, let me tell you one difference between the Bay Area and San Diego. In the Bay Area, the average board membership is 7. So somebody, if they're involved in early stage companies, they're going to be founder and CEO. They'll be chair of the board of another, and then they'll be on the board of directors for 5 more. And what that does is create a phenomenally robust, multi-centric, distributed network of nodes. And we're talking non-proprietary information, but best practices, general trends, and so on can be shared very quickly amongst a bunch of gossipy people who hang out at the same sort of networking events. And so it can be a strength, because here in San Diego, median board membership is 1. I'm currently on 1 board. And it's a challenge for us. We've actually run short of people who have the expertise to be chairs and early investors and on the board of directors. How do you fix that? You grow it. You begin with postdocs who become founders and they work in their company. And then if they make a little money, they can be an early investor and so on. And you grow the ecosystem over time. And that's pretty much what we've done in San Diego. But then how many postdocs are thinking about forming a company? Not enough. Not enough. So you have to establish the framework that encourages that. And then these early stage startups, some of them are going to want to partner with Takeda to do a research joint venture, and that's how you grow the ecosystem, and that's how you grow the talent.
Jason.
Yeah, I think Chris is spot on. What's important is to understand that one of the challenges we have in the UK is we have plenty of postdocs, probably a plethora of postdocs, if I can call it that, who want to start their own companies. But most of them don't have a clue and have never done it before. So you end up in a weird world where a lot of UK investors, because they're more risk averse, they look at these young know-nothing postdocs and they think, you've never done this before. This is incredibly risky. I don't know if I should be backing you. And then you start to get a very quick narrowing of their funnel for the deals that they will actually strike. But on the other hand, I myself experienced becoming a first-time CEO in my previous company, and I had an amazing, amazing chair in Tim Rink, and before that, Martin Murphy, but Tim, when I was CEO, who guided and mentored me so that I was able to actually rise to the occasion. And I think this is one of the models that works well in the UK right now. We can't run before we walk. And for the companies that I set up at Start Codon, the vast majority of them are first-time CEOs, in most cases, a postdoc who's taken on the technology. But we are always looking for, increasingly overseas as well, experienced chairs who are serially successful, who may not want to come in and be a CEO anymore, but they can, to Chris's point, serve on the boards of 4 or 5 different companies. And then you start to build up that ecosystem where you train the next generation and encourage them to take those leaps of faith for the next opportunity and the next. We got to get away from the fear of failure as well. This idea that somehow if I don't have everything that tick all the right boxes, I might fail when I go forward. So we need to find these individuals out there who have the capabilities but not the experience, find the experienced mentors to really hold their hands and guide them. And then that way we start to create a critical mass, which is something that we've been lacking sorely here in the UK. But once that critical mass forms, and it's starting to, we're going to be off to the races.
And I guess also the advantage that if you're recruiting those sort of mentors or sort of board members from, for example, the Bay Area or from San Diego or Massachusetts, that also actually increases your network as well.
100%. And it's one of the things that my previous company, Cambridge Epigenetics, we raised our Series B from Sequoia Capital and from Google Ventures. And so I was spending a lot of time in the Bay Area and going to San Diego as well to see Illumina back in the day. But I was able to build a personal network that I'm now tapping into for our companies here of individuals who are no longer, let's say, restricted by travel. They're happy to get on a Zoom call, they're happy to get on a Teams call and advise our companies. That's the other thing that's changed fundamentally. We know that this format works. So the idea that you can only join the board of a company, again, that you can drive to in 30 minutes, is no longer the case. As long as you can get your time zones right, you have access to the entire world's worth of expertise. So I think in a lot of ways, the barriers that have been removed by the pandemic are going to be beneficial in the long term to the UK startup ecosystem.
So Kathy, did you have a point?
I agree. No, I agree completely with all of that. I mean, one of the things that keeps coming up here, and I think is relevant to the UK, is that there is a risk issue which is in a different place to the US. And this has been the case for a long time. When you've got less finances, less resource, you want something that is less risky as an investor, and also, by the way, as a board member and taking leading roles in companies. I think the risk calculation needs to change. We need to be prepared in the UK to fail and learn from that failure. And I think that's an attitude thing, both at the academic founder level and also at the investor and building a company level.
So,
Mike, do you mind if I just step in there? I'd just like to follow on. There's some really interesting myths about failure and getting money. Number one, so from our experience at UCSD, in recent history, we've started about 750 companies, about 150 in the last 5 years. And 80% of these companies keep going. They don't fail, because we're not talking about social media startups or food startups. These are companies derived from federal funding, which deals with a big problem like heart disease or cancer. And there's funding to support them, particularly the SBIR funding, which is a godsend. And that's funding that couldn't exist in the EU, broadly speaking. And the UK has exited the EU, for better or worse, and they're trying to set up an SBIR program. I actually think it's called SBRI or something. It's a very weird name. And it's almost there. It's not perfect, but it's almost there. And the thing is, so when people start a company, particularly a technology-focused company coming out of a university, they don't need to do friends and family. They can do SBIR, and it gets them going. And that's very important. So, you know, there's, you know, most of these tech companies don't fail. And secondly, there are sources of money, or those can be created to help them grow and achieve success. And you know, if they don't, ultimately it looks great on a resume, and you're part of a community of founders who've learned something that they shouldn't do next time.
Well, one of the things that Jason also mentioned earlier on also was, you know, the fact that, you know, here in the UK, it looks like, you know, assets are not quite as expensive. So I was going to ask this question to Chad. You know, in the US, we've seen you know, both pharmaceutical companies that they are interested in going much earlier, and therefore we can sort of see that there's a sort of, you know, a dash for those assets. I'm just sort of wondering whether the you know, one, the sort of the increase in valuations that we've seen in the US, whether that actually makes the UK, you know, a more attractive place now for people to come and you know, make their investments, etc.
It's an interesting question, and it's one I actually was sort of grappling with on another panel that I spoke on with a bunch of BD executives from large pharma companies. And one of the things that we sort of took away from it was this, as sort of a first thought. Because the valuations in the US right now are so high, what's actually begun happening is, what you see is far less asset acquisitions and far more partnerships, where you might have a large upfront payment and a higher running royalty based on sales going forward. But it's a collaboration rather than an acquisition, because the valuations, frankly, for a lot of assets have reached sort of, to use a US euphemism, squirrely levels, where they're just silly. So to address your specific question, it's an interesting one, and and maybe I'll throw it out to the group too, because the part that I find fascinating is the idea that UK assets could be undervalued, because I actually don't think that's possible. I think that assets get valued for what assets get valued with, and whether it's a US research asset or a UK based research asset, because there's so much money out there, and because there's so much money, frankly, that US corporations are sitting on that are parked outside of the US. There aren't barriers for the cash to flow to assets. So I guess I would look at it from a competition perspective. There's an awful lot of competition for assets, and people will go find the asset wherever it is. Everybody has a Catherine whose job it is to sort of mine the world for assets. And it's been my experience with my clients, and maybe my experience is unique, but it's been my experience with my clients. They literally don't care where the asset is. If they see potential for it, they will go get it. And if it means some more legal fees or some tax issues, they just figure they've got people to deal with that. So I guess I struggle with the notion that maybe the asset is undervalued, but in truth, As far as overall value goes, that's probably a better question for Jason than it is for me.
Jason.
Yeah, happy to comment on that, Chad. So again, this is anecdotal as opposed to any hard reports or facts that I've read up. So I just want to give that caveat. But anecdotally speaking, I think that the general kind of sense is that because valuations, particularly, it depends on how the asset is acquired. Is it licensed or is it acquired through a company? But let's just assume it's a young startup company with a really exciting platform or some early preclinical kind of therapeutic modality that's attractive. The perception is that if you come to the UK, because most of the companies here don't have, say, wildly inflated valuations early on, that you might be able to get a better deal when you do that deal than if you were to go to the equivalent company in the States. And what I typically find from my own personal experience, and even from the companies I'm backing now, is that you get companies in the States that, like I say, they raise capital based on the strength of the team and the excitement of the investors, but they don't really have the substance. They have a good front. And that's something I learned from one of my co-founders of my previous company, who's based in the States and lived in the Bay for many years. And he would say, a lot of companies have an excellent front, but no substance. And you can raise money in the States with just the front. You've got a nice plan, you smile the right way, and it's really hot space. And they go, oh, incredible, here's 80 million. You're only 22 years old and you don't even have a degree, but that's fine. It's incredible. And then they sit and they think, well, I've got 80 million. What am I going to do with that now? And then they come sniffing overseas in the UK and they think, I know what I'll do. I'm going to find some young, plucky startup where they're afraid that they don't have what it takes to be successful. And I'm going to convince them that what they need to do is sell early to me. They can join my team, and then I can justify the valuation I have and the use of the 80 million that I've just raised. Whereas in the UK, what tends to happen, and again, I've lived this, is if I go out, let's say for my company, and I'm raising 5 mil for a seed round, people go, do you really need to raise 5 mil? Couldn't you raise 2? I don't really know. I mean, just go, let's go carefully. That's a big ask, and you're not very mature. Go to the States, they're like, are you kidding? Why aren't you raising 30 million now? Don't you believe in your opportunity? It can't be that good. And I've had those discussions, literally those very discussions myself. And so that's the kind of difference, I think, between the two sides of the pond. It's changing, and it needs to change. I think there's a halfway house. I don't want to see overinflated valuations. We should be focused on value. But at the same time, currently, people tend to think that the UK is a steal, especially when it comes to acquisitions and investments.
So I'm just going to remind the audience that there is an opportunity to ask questions, and we've had some sort of interesting statements made, particularly around, for example, valuation. So it doesn't have to be a question; it could be just a statement. That would be fine. We'll be happy to read that out. I mean, so you're talking about, so for example, sort of valuations and companies. If we sort of think back to 1991, and you look at the sort of since that time, the UK has been in the vanguard of a lot of the advances in biotech, sort of development of human monoclonal antibodies, based on a technology that was originally established in the UK in the first place. We had the cloning of Dolly the sheep, and of course, Jason mentioned it earlier. Sort of, the UK was, certainly, one of the crucibles for the genomics revolution and next generation sequencing, etc. The challenge, though, is that the UK has never been able to create a sort of a biotech behemoth like an Amgen or Gilead Sciences or even a Biogen. I mean, in 1991, the top companies were there was Celtech, there was Chiroscience, there was British Biotech, there was Zenova, Cambridge Antibody Technology, sort of a whole bunch of companies, and very, very few of them exist. I mean, Cambridge Antibody Technology, the guys who were the sort of the pioneers of human monoclonal antibodies, creating Humira, right, the world's best ever selling drug, ended up being sold to AstraZeneca. We saw cell tech, it merged with Chiroscience, it merged with Oxford Glycosciences. It now, it became sort of an R&D engine room for UCB. And in fact, of that original sort of cohort, there's only one company that kind of still exists as a standalone entity, and that's Oxford Asymmetry, which in those days was called Oxford Chirality. So, if we sort of, look at, what has actually sort of, happened, the UK has struggled to build companies that are, go to the next level. The question I have is, because this is something that I've always looked at, is this actually something that we should worry about? Is this an issue? Does it really matter that the UK has never been able to create biotech startups that have achieved that global critical mass? Chris, can I ask you to comment first?
Mike, I just wonder how many people on this webinar today know that if an invention is funded by US federal funds, then by law, it must be substantially worked in the US, unless you get a waiver. That's one element of the Bayh-Dole law. It's that simple. There's a law. If it was federally funded, it must be substantially worked, manufactured, and so on in the US. Simple solution. But the question you're talking about, the destiny of UK companies to be sort of snapped up and moved overseas, was very much the experience we have here in San Diego. We create the companies and then they get tempted away by lower tax regimes like Minnesota or Texas. And there's really two camps. One that says, we should just accept our destiny. We're one of the best places in the world for early tech stuff. We bring that money in, and then if they grow up and leave, well, we just have to live with it. There are other people who say we should try and capture the companies. I'm in the first camp, but I can see both sides. And ultimately, I think it's a volume thing, and it becomes to some degree a macroeconomic thing. How can the government try and retain a sort of British biotech part too? But I don't care. Let's start hundreds of companies and see where it goes.
Catherine.
Hi. Yeah, I mean, again, I agree with Chris. I'm not sure that this matters as much as people think it does. I think we are in a global world, however we like it, and the important thing is to grow little companies that create and take new technologies on towards patients. Because if you do that, you will create future companies. It will grow exponentially if it's successful, and spawn other companies, and maybe grow something bigger if that's the way that the money goes effectively. And both of them options, a big company and a small company growing, even in whatever format that small company turns into, will provide jobs too. For me, the fixation on growing big companies is perhaps misplaced, and the key is to make sure that, as Chris pointed out, that if something is actually funded and moved forward in the UK, that the technology development is retained in the UK in whatever format, as a subsidiary of a company or something else. The size of the company, I'm not sure, and I'm not sure you can start by thinking I need big companies. I think you have to start by growing small companies into products.
But isn't it though the fact that inventions in the UK can quite easily be exported without causing any trouble? Does not make the UK an attractive place, therefore, for US partners, because they know that actually they can come and they can take that technology and take it back home?
It does, but it won't grow your big companies in the first scenario. And I think actually for the development of the UK ecosystem, you do need to ground it so that there is some hold on, as you say, the equivalent of the federal funding, in the UK, so that you can actually say, you know, if we're investing in something in the UK, it still has to grow in the UK.
Let's build on that real quick, Mike. Sorry. I think there's another layer on top of this as well. We have an issue that, particularly in our field, the vast majority of technologies that are developed here in the UK, their first protocol will be the stage for commercialization. And then let's say 15, 17 years in the future, when it's finally cheap enough or it gets through the regulation, then it's deployed in the UK. So we have multiple innovations that are being formed right here that are never going to see the light of day, at least not in the next couple of decades, to benefit patients in the UK. So imagine a world in which we have government funding, significant billions of pounds of government funding, going to these innovations that are being developed off of the back of samples taken from the NHS, insights gained from the NHS, insights gained from these academic institutions to form these wonderful small biotechs that might grow to an SME size of maybe 50 to 100. And that's actually pretty good. They might outsource some of their work because they're staying lean, and then they get snapped up by a US co. Even if they don't get snapped up, their business plan from day one, 99% of the time is, how am I going to break into the US market? And then the conversation would be, you need to have a subsidiary in the US and maybe it needs to become your headquarters, so on and so forth. But the focus is on the most lucrative healthcare environment. So it's not just how do we grow and scale companies here. I agree with exactly what Chris and Catherine were saying, is that it's more about SMEs and it's more about lean operations. And that's something we should embrace. But also, how do we get the benefits of all this great innovation to be deployed with the UK British public itself? It should be a national shame that the NHS is funding for the benefit of US patients on a daily basis, groundbreaking research that we can't benefit from ourselves in our own backyard.
It's, if I might just jump in, Mike, Jason raises a really interesting point, which is just simple competitive market dynamics. Because in the end of the day, I have a slightly different view than Chris and Catherine. Small companies are great, and you need them to do the basic research and to take the risks that larger companies won't take. But in the end of the day, that infrastructure that gets built as you grow a large company, I grew up with Gilead Sciences. I've been representing them for 15 years. And when I first started representing them, they had one product. And by any measure, you would call them a small company. And so I've spent the last 15 years of my career growing with them and seeing the evolution and the change. And the fundamentals of what you have to build and the experience you have to gain to go from these small companies to these large organizations. Commercialization of a product is hard. Marketing of a product is hard. Knowing how to get into markets, whether it's getting on the right formulary or getting into the right hospital system. Those are all challenging things. And I think that until the underlying problem that Jason is identifying is addressed, then I don't know fundamentally if it's truly possible for the UK to develop these large entities, and you can roll them out, right? Amgen, AbbVie, Gilead. Because in the end of the day, the market dynamics are going to force them through the logical chain of thought that Jason just identified. How do we break into the US market because it's the most lucrative?
So, okay, so I want to sort of jump back, and I'm not really sure which member of the panelists sort of raised it, but it's the sort of the concept that in the US, I mean, we talk about Massachusetts, we talk about the Bay Area, and we talk about San Diego as being the super clusters within the life sciences space, and then the rest of the world is then competing. In the US, though, is it just about California and Massachusetts, or where are the other sort of rising stars of US biotech that our audience should also be looking to reach out to? Chad, I'm shocked, sort of like, because I think it was you that actually mentioned, places like Philadelphia and Washington, etc.
It's a really great question, and I guess the immediate areas that jump to mind, Philadelphia is at the top of the list. Philadelphia puts a tremendous amount of resources into trying to attract biotech companies, biotech startups. And it has a lot of elements of that ecosystem that Jason mentioned. It has world-class research institutions. It also has world-class research hospitals and a fair amount of density. But the interesting thing, I think, is in the U.S. In the U.S. migration patterns are driven by two things: taxes and weather. It's why you see Texas exploding the way that you do. It's why you see everybody moving to Florida. U.S. winters in the northern part of the country are hard. And at some point you just think, I don't need to deal with this anymore. I used to live in Delaware. We moved to San Diego because, how can you beat 75-degree weather year round? So I would be looking at places like Austin, Texas, places to a lesser extent, Houston. If it was Texas, I'd be looking at Austin and San Antonio, and in Florida at Miami, because those are the places that already have some of that ecosystem built between the world-class research institutions, University of Texas in Austin, University of Florida, and they have the huge research hospitals, and they have the tax environment where people can see the quality of their life improve. California is a hard place to live. The weather is great, but the cost of living here is exorbitant. And it drives people to other places. So to me, what I would do is literally draw a line across the country and look south. Florida, Texas, Arizona, it's pretty simple. Those are the states that are growing like crazy. Atlanta.
I'd add one more. I'd add Research Triangle Park, actually,
yes.
North Carolina, as a growth area. Yeah.
Yeah, although North Carolina is pretty humid, though, isn't it? At times, North Carolina, South Carolina, it can get pretty humid. And in Florida, nice. they get all those hurricanes.
Catherine's absolutely right about the Research Triangle up in North Carolina, and there's an awful lot the UK can look to for. There's a lot of comparisons there. I did want to mention, though, in terms of innovation superclusters, I think London, Oxford, Cambridge, you combine it, you've got pretty much an innovation supercluster in the biotech area there. But also London has two other superclusters, that's law and banking. Absolutely, no question at all. And these things matter. The Bay Area benefits from having a sort of tech Silicon Valley type supercluster, as well as the biotech. There are synergies there, absolutely, digital health, etc. But I just want to flip it around, look at the UK. Where are the places that one could look to grow an innovation cluster? I'm absolutely thinking Liverpool, Manchester, Leeds and Sheffield, world-class universities, great places to live. Weather's not great, but you can fly to Spain for a vacation. And I think there's some really interesting opportunities. And what we've seen around the US is places deliberately planning to grow their economy, doing the things that get the job done. And you can see positive results. Go for it.
Yeah, so, okay. So we've got some questions coming in from the audience, which is great. Over the last few years, there seemed to be a lot more spin-out startup companies being set up, i.e. in cell and gene therapy space. Could it ever get to the point where there are just too many companies in that space for US investors or partners? Catherine.
I don't think so. I think this is the future. This is the area that's really growing, whether you're in the investor space or whether you're in the company space. And I think what we're looking for is new, really innovative technologies, and a lot of them fit into the cell and gene therapy space that are going to make, products that really make a difference to patients, even cures. And I think this is the future. I think there is plenty of opportunity to get investment from the US wherever you're looking for in those spaces. So at the moment, I wouldn't worry about that, is my advice. I think, but don't forget to go, if you're looking for support, to companies for partnerships. I do think this is an opportunity which is being underused by the UK.
So you mean actually going directly to the business development offices at pharmaceutical companies?
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely.
Okay. And
if it's in their space, they'll invest.
Right. Okay. Because that they can get more than just finance. They can actually build those internal networks that exist within the pharma companies.
And more important, we can support the translational piece. So help them to answer the questions that really validate an approach and turn it into a product, and then use that product, particularly in the cell and gene space, use that knowledge across a portfolio.
Right. And how easy is that to do with US pharmaceutical companies, given the fact that they've already got so many opportunities on their doorstep?
My view is that there is plenty of opportunity, and a lot of the companies like my own are starting to see it this way and are really investing in this space. And it might not be starting up a company, but it might be, because that's clearly an option. But the point is, it really builds robust approaches and robust validation that can be widely used. And I'm seeing a lot of companies invest earlier and earlier. And of course, I like to think Takeda is leading the way, and I think we are. But others are doing this as well. It is still competitive, and that means that there's still an appetite for that sort of technology.
Jason,
I'd just like to comment, if I may.
all right.
Having worked with Takeda, I think Catherine would agree that working with a state institution like the University of California is rather hard, because we're a state entity and we have rules. In theory, it should be easier working with UK universities because they're not officially state entities. There isn't a huge rule book. There is an opportunity there for the UK.
Agreed.
But on the other hand, is it not the case that, again, because of sort of the experience of those much bigger organizations, some of the universities in California, Massachusetts have got massive experience in the tech transfer space, that actually, although you sort of say there's a state rule book, isn't it the case that the deals that they do are almost vanilla deals?
Well, that's an important point, and there's something worth looking at. If you look at some of the agreement templates, both on the research side and the license and investment side, you look at Harvard, Stanford, MIT, those documents are almost the same as the ones I use. But there's one big difference. Those are all private institutions. They can do whatever they like. They don't, and my argument, rightly or wrongly, is that the University of California is so massive, we've distorted the field. Everyone's forced to follow on from what we do. And I've certainly talked to investors who say they love to see the cover page of our license documents because they know what is exact in every single page of that agreement. They know instantly. And so it makes life easy, it makes deals easy.
Yeah, I would certainly agree that there is a difference in the US to state-funded and private. I have to say, on the whole, most of our deals are individual. It's very rarely that we template across them and it works. Tech transfer officers are quite demanding, and yes, and I think the logic to there being a level of templating of these agreements is definitely strong, as it speeds up the whole process. And certainly the UK building, a partnership mentality should be thinking about, should we say, lowering the legal costs and making things happen, get to the science faster. and maybe an equivalent of the Bayh-Dole is actually a way forward here. And for me, the other side of that is the demands of the tech transfer officers are not uniform and are usually over the top, should we say.
Couldn't agree more.
Jason.
Yeah, I was going to say I 100% agree with everything Catherine and Chris just said. It's one of the biggest bottlenecks for innovation in the UK is not access to capital, particularly now. Capital is free flowing in our spaces. It's the tech transfer offices. I'm actually actively trying to work with a consortium of interested parties, going to government and policies, you name it, to try to figure out a way to change this. And I implore everybody who's listening on this call with any even iota of interest or power, please do get in touch. We need to have a kind of upswell of interest in really unlocking the potential from academic research in the UK and making sure that tech transfer offices and the government embrace the kind of frameworks like Bayh-Dole, which has been mentioned several times on this panel. I also wanted to say quickly to the point that was raised is that one of the things I love to tell people, you don't have to be the first to do something, and you really don't have to be the only person doing it either, particularly in the investment world, that it's de-risking when you see competition in a space. As an investor, I want to know how you're going to be the best company. So with the cell and gene therapy space, for example, every day there's a new discovery that's made. Just when you think that, oh, CRISPR, there's no need for another gene editor, up pops a new one, or 5 more, or 10 more. Well, we think we know what T cells are. Oh, wait, it turns out that there are multiple subtypes of T cells, and each one might have a different function. And there are subtypes of subtypes. It's not just Tregs, there's these Tregs versus those Tregs. There's always a new discovery that can lend itself to new innovation and new insights. So there's not really an oversaturation of ideas or opportunities at all.
Sure. Chad, did you have any comments on this? Just in terms of, do we need any more? So yeah, genomics and cell gene therapy companies,
I agree with Catherine. I don't think you can have too many. The more that are coming, it's not I'm going to do what the other person did. Every new technology that comes out, every new sort of innovation in this space is an advancement of what came before, or otherwise it wouldn't exist. So no, I don't think oversaturation is a concern.
Right. So we've got another question from the audience. Given the current US administration efforts on healthcare and access to it, will the US market remain so far ahead of the rest of the world in terms of market size and therefore attractiveness to to the sort of the pharma world, whether it's the indigenous pharma companies or in fact so European and Asian companies looking longingly at that market? Who would like to have first?
I'm happy to start on that one if you don't mind. So my view is absolutely the market is going to remain the way that the market is. I think that in the US, in the end of the day, what we're talking about is pricing and drug prices in particular, and whether or not we are going to go to a system where essentially prices are set at a much lower rate than they currently are. Because in the end of the day, what drives the size of the US market is essentially the price that can be commanded for the end product. And as appealing as the idea might be that we can force lower drug prices, one, I don't see it happening. Two, we can talk about the current administration all we want. I used to live in Delaware. I actually know the Bidens. And the one thing that I will say about the Delaware economy is this: they understand the importance of pharmaceutical development, and they understand the importance of the type of research and revenue and investment that gets generated at all levels of the economy from having the system that we have. Chris Coons, the senator from Delaware, has a chemistry background and has experience in the pharma industry. So while on one hand we talk about the notion of let's call it drug pricing reform, I think that it's pretty well understood the impact that would have on the overall economy, and I don't foresee it happening. I think there will be more programs set up to help therapies become more accessible. I think a lot of U.S. companies already recognize that just from for lack of a better way of saying it, from a marketing perspective, that they need to make their products more accessible to populations that can't afford it, and they're doing that. But I just can't envision a world, and maybe it's my own self-interest, but I just can't envision a world where where there's the political support universally to force lower drug prices.
Catherine, do you have a comment?
I just want to add something to that, is that I tend to agree with Chad on the US, but actually I think we shouldn't undersell the opportunity that the NHS provides for us. Hopefully, potentially, unified healthcare system, which can actually, negotiate better drug prices, could change the whole plot in terms of how medicines are, diverted to the UK. So I think the UK market is potentially growing and in a good position to develop its market. But of course, as a company, you're thinking, where is the market? The market is always going to be predominantly in the US, but don't forget massive markets in China, Asia, and the question is, can they afford the drugs? And that's what we have to deal with. It's a bit like the vaccine discussion in some ways. We've got to deal with getting drugs to people that need them, and that's about money.
Jason.
Yeah, I wanted to take a different take on this piece. I think going forward, there's, especially COVID has shown us, such an emphasis on early detection and prevention as opposed to cure. And we always say prevention is better than cure, but I do think that some of the mega blockbuster interventions of the future will be about keeping people well and healthy, and probably some kind of longitudinal support as opposed to acute therapeutic interventions that are quite expensive. So the qualities and the kind of health economics change when you're thinking, I might be spending £2 million over the lifetime of an individual to make sure that they never get cancer, as opposed to treating them with a £2 million drug when they eventually do get cancer. And there will be a tipping point when we get to the stage where I think a lot of pharma companies will increasingly embrace that mindset of, how can I, from cradle to grave, keep the majority of people healthy and well, and then for those extreme cases where people do get sick, have the best treatment, as opposed to waiting for what we think is the inevitable and then trying to convince the reimbursement agencies that my drug is worth it because I get this kind of outcome. So there will be a shift in that direction. And I see it from the likes of Exact Sciences. Diagnostics used to be the cheap, stepchild of therapeutics, but now you see Exact with Cologuard. They're a multi-billion-dollar market cap company, all based on a simple one product test for the early detection of colorectal cancer, because we know that we can find the cancer, zap the adenoma, and the majority of patients are fine. So that's around $500 every couple of years to keep you healthy, rather than trying to go for a very expensive stage 2, stage 3 cancer chemotherapeutic test, therapeutic. So I think that the way we go about with the insurance payer providers and what we think is worthwhile expenditure for keeping people healthy is going to be the future, as opposed to just how much does a particular therapeutic intervention cost.
Okay, I'm just going to sort of give an advert. So one of the audience members basically reached out and said, about Florida, if you want to hear more about the biotech cluster and the available soft landing programs to connect with that ecosystem, then you can contact Yasin Nahi at eflorida-europe.com. So that's just a somebody just sort of saying, hey, Florida, it's more than a sunny place. And I think it's sort of reiterating some of the things that the panelists were mentioning. So just a easy advert there. So looking at, this subject was about, sort of the opportunities for UK life sciences companies to connect with the sort of the US ecosystem and opportunities there. But so the question I'd like to ask though is actually should UK biotech companies be looking westwards, across the Atlantic, or are there other places that actually they might be better placed trying to connect with? So I'm going to ask Jason, maybe it's sort of kick off this one, given the fact that you are looking wherever you can.
I am definitely. I'm very open-minded when it comes to opportunities. As long as they want to come and set up in the UK, I'm your person. I think it depends on what they're interested in. So, for example, if you're looking for today the most lucrative market, and that market pool that Chad was mentioning, the US, some parts of Europe, Germany, maybe some of Scandinavia, some of the Nordics, etc., but US. If you want to get into East Asia, then obviously you're going to need a partner to get into China. But Singapore is a vibrant ecosystem with loads of capital. So if you're looking to fundraise as opposed to necessarily market share, Singapore is fantastic. I think that the BRICS have always been something interesting, like India, Brazil, etc., but they have their challenges. But my company, Cambridge Epigenetics, that I was running before, we did a deal where part of our Series C, we had a Brazilian investor, which is part of the DASA group, one of the largest diagnostics groups in Latin America, based in Brazil, because it would have given us access to the critical samples we needed from a very diverse patient base in order for us to develop our test. So it wasn't that we were necessarily just going to Brazil because we thought they'd be a large market for the diagnostic we were developing. In fact, we were going there because they were a rich source of samples that were affordable and easy for us to obtain to develop the diagnostic in the first place. So I do think that when it comes to rest of world, LATAM, Africa, etc., there are opportunities there now for co-development work, for access to samples, and for getting a foothold in a realm where markets are increasingly becoming attractive for your product, as opposed to just focusing on America, because that's where you're going to be selling into. So you need to have kind of an expansive view on the world.
And I guess for our American based colleagues on the panel, I mean, can you ever sort of envisage a time when the UK and maybe it's just, let's just focus on the sort of golden triangle, actually would be the place that US innovators would actually look almost to the UK as a first choice for incubating and building companies around assets they've developed? Chris, you're nodding.
I want to say absolutely. Even if it's just one part of the innovation cascade, we clearly know that we can work remotely, that sometimes we need to relocate assets to where they can best be incubated for a certain stage of growth. There is no doubt in my mind that the Golden Triangle or other places in the UK can be that destination. But I also think the UK, particularly the biotechs, can be looking at US leadership to bring them in. You want a chair of the board right now. I'm sure there's a lot of people who'd be happy to spend 4 or 5 years in London working on a biotech company. Absolutely. So yeah, very much a place.
Anyway, so we're at the end of time. So these are sort of effectively sort of the concluding comments. So I mean, obviously, I'd like to thank all the panelists. But yeah, it'd be interesting if you've got sort of any comments around, what does the UK have to do to maintain its place in global biotech, if not actually increase its influence going forward? I'll start with, we'll do reverse order. So I'll start with Catherine, then go to Chad, then Chris, and then Jason.
Well, my biggest comment is think globally and think across the ecosystem. So whether you're looking for money, you're looking to develop, you're looking to partner, All of these things, I think you shouldn't actually worry too much about where that talent and where that comes from. And the US is absolutely a strong player in that. So think globally. I obviously I'm biased that I believe that incubating things with partnerships is a very effective way of doing it.
I think I'm next. I agree with everything that Catherine just said. I think the only thing that I would add is think about the barriers that exist, whatever they might be, and eliminate them. Whether it's needing to incentivize companies through something like the Bayh-Dole Act, whether it's regulatory hurdles that impact effective contracting. Whatever it might be, identify the barriers and do whatever you can to eliminate them.
Jason.
Yeah, and oh.
I was going to Jason. You're last, Chris. So Jason.
Okay. So I would say that the UK is a fantastic place. We have the technology, that we have access to capital. What we need are people and better policies.
Okay, thanks, Jason. Chris.
And yeah, I agree with all of those comments. And the time to act is right now at a national level, post-pandemic, both in terms of the ability to do remote work, but also the ability to rapidly deploy medical innovations. We're living in a new time. It's just, we've got to capture it. The UK is post-Brexit, and it's just get on and do it.
Yeah, great. Thanks very much. And I think that there's sort of that strong message about Bayh-Dole and the advantages that's brought. I think that that's a message that maybe can be sent to the UK government. Thank you very much for your contributions. This has been great. I've really appreciated it. I'm sure the audience has. So you get a virtual round of applause. And I'm going to hand back over to Alicia.
Excellent. Thank you very much indeed, Mike, for facilitating that wonderful discussion. Very thoughtful, and to all the panelists as well. Just to say that I will disseminate a recording of the session in a follow-up email. I think the panelists and the panel have really just highlighted how fortunate we are to have access to the people and economies that are really driving the growth and development of businesses, biotech businesses in the UK and the US, and I've certainly learned a thing or two from listening. So once again, thank you all to taking part. Thank you to the audience for joining, and it was also brilliant to do this in collaboration with Fish Richardson. So I just wish everyone a good rest of the day or evening, depending on where you're located. And also, please do check out the upcoming events on the One Nucleus website. The next BioWednesday is on the 2nd of June on ESG and life science investment. So looking forward to another fruitful panel discussion on that topic. So with that, I'm going to close the session. Thank you very much.
Thank you.